Over the past few years, the first video we've published in each calendar year has almost always been an exciting look forward at what we can hope to expect from Final Fantasy. But this year feels different. For what seems like decades now, there has almost always been some kind of release looming on the horizon, whether that be a mainline entry or supporting property, a high-profile spin-off, or an expansion. We were spoiled with just how much Final Fantasy there was on the table. Between 2010 and 2013, for example, we had the releases of Final Fantasy XIII and XIV, Dissidia Duodecim, the Japanese launch of Type 0, and the hope it would be localized, Final Fantasy IV The Complete Collection, Theatre of Them, Final Fantasy XIII-2 and XIV A Realm Reborn, and Bravely Default as a nice adjacent property. Countless other games were also released during this period, such as Airborne Brigade and Chocobo's Chocoto Farm, and when combined, it meant 51 unique properties related to Final Fantasy were brought to market during just a 3-year period. There came an appreciation, however, that quantity was not a substitute for quality, and when Yosuke Matsuda replaced Yuichi Wada, he set out to significantly reduce how many Final Fantasy games were released, with the hope of increasing the wider perception of the brand. This saw the average number of Final Fantasy games released per year fall from 12.75 down to just 4 in 2020. And last year, there were only 3 properties released: Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy XVI The Rising Tide, and Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. It means that we now find ourselves in a strange situation. As we look ahead, there are no confirmed original properties scheduled to release in 2025 or beyond. And the things we do know about are the final part in a trilogy that has yet to formally be announced and may not arrive for another 2 to 4 years, and the next expansion in an MMO that also has not been formally announced and likewise probably won't arrive for another 2 to 3 years. That's not to say things aren't happening, however. So within this video, we're going to talk about what we do know before delving into some speculation. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth had a very successful launch last year, at least from a critical perspective. It received incredible scores from critics all around the world, and has received over 30 commendations at Game of the Year awards, a feat only surpassed by Astrobot. Thus far, however, Square Enix has yet to reveal any kind of global sales figures around the game. The only thing we know is that when combined with Final Fantasy XVI and the countless other games released by Square Enix during the previous fiscal year, the HD games segment collectively did not manage to reach profitability and suffered an operating loss of over $50 million. To try and counteract this, Square Enix has embarked on an aggressive multi-platform strategy, and the latest step in this strategy will be seen on the 23rd of January when Final Fantasy VII Rebirth launches on PC. This, of course, was always planned before the new strategy was put in place, as Final Fantasy VII Remake also launched on PC. But it's more the speed of the port that stands out. Despite the exclusivity agreements not lasting anywhere near as long, Final Fantasy VII Remake took 14 months to appear on PC, and Final Fantasy XVI took 15 months. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth only had a 3-month exclusivity window, but the port will be arriving less than 12 months after its release. And not only that, it's set to come with some significant enhancements. According to the specifications, the game can reach up to 120 frames per second and will come with some huge enhancements to general graphics and lighting. To try and sweeten the deal, anyone who pre-orders the game ahead of its release will also get 30% off the recommended retail price. Let's just hope that the port arrives in a very playable state, unlike 7 Remake, which featured in our previous video about some of the worst ports in the history of the franchise. Of course, now that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has been out for almost a year, thoughts have already started to move on to the third installment in the trilogy. Naoki Hamaguchi, the director of Rebirth, has spoken about his desire to have Part 3 release sooner rather than later. And with the PC port coming out in record time and no downloadable content being produced for the specific objective of not impeding development on Part 3, the educated guess is that it will arrive towards the start of 2027, 3 years after Rebirth. If that is indeed the intended release window, then there's an outside chance that Part 3 might be officially unveiled this year. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, was unveiled at the Final Fantasy VII 25th anniversary livestream, which aired 20 months before the game shipped. But while we wait for news on Part 3 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, Ever Crisis will continue to plug along. Throughout 2024, it found a dedicated global community, and in Japan at least, it earned approximately $25 million. This represents modest returns, but it's around half of what Brave Exvius and War of the Visions earned during their first full calendar years on the market. Regardless, 2025 is sure to have plenty of collaborations in store, as well as a continuation of Sephiroth's backstory. On the subject of Brave Exvius, the global version was shut down towards the end of 2024, but as yet, there appears to be no signs that the Japanese version will suffer the same fate. War of the Visions should also continue to see content produced throughout 2025, but given that Square Enix seems to be cutting away all of the deadwood in its mobile catalogue, we may see the global version suffer a similar fate. For reference, Square Enix shut down numerous properties last year in addition to the global version of Brave Exvius. Triple Triad, for example, was removed from the Final Fantasy Portal app, but they also shut down Engage Kill, Full Metal Alchemist mobile RPG, Dragon Quest Champions and Dragon Quest Keshi Keshi, and Towa Sugai. Square Enix also transferred ownership of Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent to NetEase, who were previously responsible for managing the game's operations in Southeast Asia and China. Sticking with the theme of mobile and China, it was revealed back in August that Square Enix had gained approval to release a previously unannounced mobile version of Final Fantasy XIV in the region, which was tentatively dubbed Final Fantasy XIV Crystal World. Square Enix then announced the game officially in November as a free-to-play iteration of the venerable MMO that has been custom-built from the ground up for the platform. The game is not being worked on by Square Enix directly though, instead it's being developed by Lightspeed Studios, who have officially licensed the property. However, it is noted that employees from Square Enix are supervising the project. Lightspeed revealed that they pitched the idea to Yoshida 5 years ago, and this was no doubt part of the strategic venture that Square Enix signed with Tencent back in 2018. So far, no release date or release window has been specified, but the team did note that they have already been working on the game for years. Closed beta tests are already underway, with numerous videos being released online from those who are taking part. Should tests go well, then they plan to launch the game in mainland China first, before making further adjustments ahead of its global launch outside of China. We should therefore expect to hear much more about this throughout 2025, and if things go well, then hopefully it should launch in both China and the rest of the world this year. Last but not least, we then have Final Fantasy XIV itself. Ever since the release of Heavensward, Final Fantasy XIV has been on a prominent upward trajectory. Heavensward received an OpenCritic of 85, and each subsequent expansion improved on the last, culminating in Endwalker receiving a 93. Dawntrail, though, only managed to score an 81, which was lower than A Realm Reborn when it launched over 10 years ago. The team at Creative Studio 3 are undeterred, however, and have been pumping out a steady release of content to try and keep active players engaged. In 2025, this will see the launch of patch 7.16 on the 21st of January, just a few days before the launch of Rebirth on PC. Patch 7.2, which promises to be much more substantial, should then launch towards the end of Q1, but its timing suggests that they are sticking with the Endwalker patch schedule as opposed to the pre-Endwalker patch schedule, and if that's the case, we shouldn't expect to hear anything about the next expansion until 2026. It means that right now, the only properties that exist, or will exist, relate to either Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy XIV, or Brave Exvius. There are some promising unknowns, however, and in that regard, we need to go back to Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered. Out of the two remaining projects that featured in the infamous Nvidia leak, Tactics Remastered seems to be the more plausible of the two. Naoki Yoshida has a huge amount of respect for Yasumi Matsuno, the director of the original Tactics, and they have since worked together on Final Fantasy XIV. Square Enix have also released Tactics Ogre Reborn, a faithful adaptation of another of Matsuno's prior works that came with a host of quality of life adjustments. And in more recent times, Yoshida teamed up with Hironobu Sakaguchi to publish an enhanced console port of Fantasian dubbed Fantasian Neo Dimension. The interesting twist in this particular story, however, is that Yoshida also went on record a few months ago when being interviewed by Japanese publication 4Gamer. It was a wide-ranging discussion, but Yoshida noted that he would love to see Vagrant Story and Tactics re-released at some point, and that's about as compelling as things can get without Square Enix making an official announcement. The Final Fantasy IX remake, unfortunately, has not been given the same treatment. After what felt like a slew of leaks and rumours, everything appears to have gone cold. and the other somewhat unrelated hurdle is that the Final Fantasy IX anime has also got into some trouble. Back in October, it was reported that Cyber Group Studios, the company that had been working on an adaptation of Final Fantasy IX in collaboration with Square Enix, was suffering from significant financial troubles. That then escalated in December, with numerous studios bidding to acquire Cyber Group Studios and its individual contracts. Amongst this, it was revealed that Newen Studios was attempting to acquire the rights to the Final Fantasy IX animated series, with it speculated that this would be passed to its Blue Spirit production house, which was responsible for the likes of Blue Eye Samurai and Mini Ninjas, which was produced in collaboration with Cyber Group Studios based on the IP when it was owned by Square Enix. Needless to say, things have become quite messy. Based on this, it's unclear if we'll hear anything about projects related to Final Fantasy IX in 2025, but there's always hope. Beyond that, however, we're just going into wild speculation territory. For example, it's safe to assume that Final Fantasy XVII is at least currently being thought about, as it's already been 18 months since the release of Final Fantasy XVI. For example, even though there were 4 years between the release of Final Fantasy XV and the announcement of Final Fantasy XVI, planning had been well underway for years by that point. But outside of the next main numbered entry, it's unclear what other directions the Final Fantasy franchise may go in. Some projects may have been part of Takeshi Kiryu's massive cull, but with a huge decrease in scope around the franchise in the past 4 to 5 years, we just have to hope that whatever does manifest will be of the highest quality. With that though, we hope you've enjoyed our short look ahead for the Final Fantasy franchise. Based on what we discussed, which of the known projects are you most looking forward to? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and make sure to also let us know your hopes and dreams for the franchise too. And make sure you subscribe to the channel, as irrespective of what games are planned to release, we have plenty of exciting projects in the works. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, and Zukan TDK, who are super special Onion Eye supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.